How are you guys doing? This is Martin from Gardens for Life and Burland Homestead. So we're just a few minutes late today because we were just running a workshop on pressure canning. And of course, the enthusiasm kept us there, chatting away about all things food preservation. So we'll just wait for a few people to join us and let me know if you have any questions. Let me just see here. So if you have any questions, please write them into the comments or into the chat, and I'll try to answer them for you. So for those of you not familiar with Gardens for Life, you can ask questions, anything to do with no-dig gardening, lasagna gardening, forest gardening, all kinds of things about perennials. Of course, that's one of our specialties, perennial plants, because they're less work and less maintenance to keep than annuals, and it's a much more sustainable way of gardening. You can also ask questions about homesteading and chicken keeping. Country winemaking is also included. So, I was in a mad rush to get here to try and get everything done just on time. And we are just done there of running our pressure canning workshop only a few minutes ago. So that went very well, and people walked away with all the knowledge they need to do it themselves at home. How are you doing, Kevin? How is your gardening week going? Well, I'm glad you asked. So I've actually just finished, last week I finished planting up the new garden. That's the new no-dig garden that video series was out of. So it's a no-dig garden with just regular old wood chip paths, and I planted that up last week. This week now I've already expanded that garden by about double. So we have doubled our area for planting, the grow space, and I'm just in the process of planting it up. I've most of the plants gone in, especially ochres and yacons. I have some more yacons and mashuas to go in. So these are all tuberous vegetables, for those of you not familiar with them. And there's all sorts of different tuberous vegetables, just like potato. Well, actually, they're not really even similar, but they're different. And they can be kept actually relatively pest-free. I don't think I've had any problems at all with Jerusalem artichokes, for example, mashua, ochre, and even yacon. The only thing is the frost. Of course, that's the thing you have to mind. Talking of the frost, how are you doing, Chris? So you have a question here. What date do you plant out courgettes and pumpkins? Wind damage is something I haven't actually experienced myself in the garden, because I do try to block the wind before I even start the garden. So I was listening to Toby Hemingway a long time ago on a Permaculture Voices conference talk, and Toby says that you can shelter, if you can shelter your garden, basically create a shelter belt, say out of willow, something fast growing, you can, if you can block the wind, your fruit trees, for example, would actually grow twice as fast. And it'll also be a lot less likely that your blossoms are going to either freeze or even get blown away. So I have my pumpkin plants planted out all right. I've been told the 1st of June by market gardeners like Richard Perkins and Charles at the Bull on Ark in Lochray. And I think mainly you try to avoid the last frost when planting out pumpkins and courgettes. The problem is the leaves are very big and they can get wind damaged, all right. That's why I'll always recommend that you plant your shelter belt on the west side of your garden. Well, in Ireland anyway, that's where the prevailing winds are coming from. And in our garden, in the bigger garden anyway, if you've seen the videos, I actually cut back the shelter belt completely in the winter time for cuttings. It's all willow mostly, with the odd wild fruit tree interplanted, like sloes or plums or crabapple, or even some walnuts actually in there. So mostly willow, doe, and poplar. So I cut those back in the winter, and in the springtime, they're only small and they let a lot of light through. But in the summer, by midsummer, they will have grown to about 2.5 meters or 8 feet tall, and they'll block the wind then once your uh, vegetables with larger leaves come into it. So unfortunately, yeah, the wind was a problem. I think the wind doesn't cause as much damage as the rain in our gardens anyway. Usually everything droops when there is a heavy rain. So then you have all the branches get heavier, and then all the pathways through the garden get blocked, and then you have to go around snipping things away. And it's always a bit of a shame to snip away at plants that are actually plants that you want to keep, but you have to be able to access your garden. And I think access is sometimes more important than the productivity of the plants that are near the path. Although, what's his name? Michael Pilarski is well worth looking up on YouTube. You can find him. Somebody else actually did a YouTube channel for him. He's based in Washington State in the US. And Michael Pilarski once said that he grows the pumpkins at the edge of the garden so that they can take over the grass that is near the garden and block the sunlight to it, because the pumpkin vines actually climb over the top of the grass and just block the sunlight, which is good, suppresses the weeds somewhat, and at the edge of your garden. But also, if a pumpkin vine, as it happens, can grow over the top of a pat, and he might say, I didn't really need that pat that much, so I can do without that pat for, say, the coming months. So that's what happens in our gardens a lot from late summer, let's say from probably even July, August. Sometimes some of the paths get overgrown with the plants that we actually want to grow, not weeds, most of the time anyway. And basically the path is more productive if it's covered. So as long as we have other options to get to the garden, like say by walking around, then we're happy enough. So that's why I always make the gardens always with paths going in different directions, just so you have options in case one gets blocked, which is also true for roads as well. If you live down a cul-de-sac and the road gets blocked by a fallen tree in a storm, well, then you can't get out unless you have a chainsaw, of course, like I do. But in the garden, it's a smaller scale, and I like to look at it from a point of view of patterns, same as permaculture. Patterns in permaculture are very important, and you'll see them if you look, if you really look. And the trained eye can actually see the patterns more quickly in nature as well. So, folks, please let me know if you have any questions. We still have we still have spots for our growing food using no-dig gardening and forest gardening, a workshop on Saturday, if anyone's interested, in case you're not too far away from here. We're based near Roscommon Town. We also are going to be doing different workshops coming up as well. Pressure canning is just one. We also have another chicken workshop coming up too in a couple of weeks. How are you doing, Alan? Thanks for coming to the questions and answers. Tips on removing greenfly in a tunnel. I don't know how to put this to you. So the question is, if the greenfly infestation is really bad, it might be worth getting rid of a plant. I would maybe, if you have a number of tomato plants, like you say there, if it's just one plant out of 20 or whatever, I just remove the whole plant and get rid of it, put it outside, and keep an eye on the surrounding other plants, and maybe spray those with whatever natural insecticide one would use. People often ask us if we are organic growers, and the first response I usually give is we don't even use what organic growers are allowed to use. We don't spray anything in our gardens, but if it's a tunnel, like a polytunnel or a greenhouse, unfortunately that is an actual artificial environment, and you have to serve all of the needs of the plant in an artificial environment. Even a pot, like a container grown plant, is also stuck at your mercy of you bringing resources to it, like water and maybe even some nutrients on a daily basis. In a greenhouse, so the first thing, Alan, you want to look at is, so if a plant has been infected, or if it's suffering, that's when the insects go for the plant. Like even the slugs. The slugs are just the recyclers of the cold temperate climate. They're not a bad animal or anything like that, but they recycle stressed plants, or plants that are stressed or dying or dead, even dead plant matter, although the worms also consume that too. So I think the same is true for any pest at all, or for any parasite as well. Now, green fly is not necessarily bad, but it becomes a problem when it's concentrated in a artificial environment like the greenhouse. I would say probably some garlic spray. If anyone else here has any input on that, maybe you guys have more experience in spraying plants with some kind of an insecticide than I have. I mean, like even if it's a natural insecticide. I believe you can make a tea from garlic with garlic and then just spray it on the plants. You can also use other plants as well. But again, I'm not sure which ones you would spray. But again, tomatoes and potatoes, them both coming from the same family of plants, they're actually very similar, and they have very thin leaves, so they get infected very easily, and they get stressed very easily because they also lose a lot of moisture very quickly. I would say look up herbal remedies for greenfly and just spray them, and maybe if it's just one plant, just get rid of it. You can introduce ladybirds, and the trouble is, though, finding enough ladybirds to make it worthwhile is a problem. Maybe you have plenty of them outside, and you used to be able to buy them from the UK, but they're no longer available, of course, since Brexit, unfortunately. And they were not cheap now. They weren't too cheap now. I think it was like 50 ladybirds for £50 or something like that. And I was thinking about actually introducing them into our local ecosystem here. And I never did now, but we always try to attract the ladybirds, all the beneficial insects, of course, the bumblebee especially. And we plant a lot of butterfly bushes as well. The buddleia, it attracts butterflies and other insects to your garden. Again, I think it's just a little bit of a lack of biodiversity and a bit of a little bit of a strange environment in a polytunnel. Our polytunnel up the road, you probably remember it, Alan, when you were here a couple of years ago. The polytunnel still hasn't got doors in it, so it's technically speaking not really a greenhouse because it doesn't get that warm unless the sun is shining. And but it does actually help with ventilation a lot to keep the doors open. But the problem with that is it dries out the polytunnel so much. So really, it's a matter of it's a balance between ventilation and keeping the moisture in. So ventilation, because you want to stop the mold from growing. You don't want to end up with mold in your polytunnel either, because that'll cause, of course, your tomatoes to get blight. Well, blight is just mold. Well, do you guys have any other questions? Anyone that just joined, if you can ask me questions in the chat or on the comments. I'll keep an eye out for your questions. No. Oh, just reading the comments here. We are currently live on Facebook, for those of you who are still there, on YouTube, on our 2 accounts actually. So we have the Gardens for Life YouTube channel, and we also have the Birdland, the Birdland Homestead channel, and we're also live on Twitter, which is well, formerly known as Twitter. It's X now. So not sure if there's any of you guys following us over there. Probably YouTube is where most people are these days, and we also have an Odyssey channel as well. But we have yet to sync our Birdland Homestead channel with Odyssey. It's becoming a little more difficult. Oh, please let me know if you have any questions. I've actually been invited to do a talk at a garden club in County Longford, so we're going to be doing that now in a couple of weeks. And we've been asked to get involved with a seed saving initiative by the Westmead Libraries. So that's another thing that's going on, and we're going to be sending them a proposal, and we are definitely seed savers. We've always been saving our own seed from all kinds of different crops, especially flowers, like great mullein, marigolds, and well, all of the flowers and some of the vegetables too. A lot of our vegetables, of course, are perennial, so there isn't any seed. A lot of them don't go to seed anymore. Our kale now, a lot of the varieties do produce seed, and you can also grow them from cuttings as well. So I guess seed saving is really it works for most vegetables and flowers, and even for fruit, although with a lot of fruit it doesn't come through to type if you grow it from seed. But with some berries, for example, it doesn't really matter. It'll be close enough to the mother plant where the seed came from. And I'm definitely going to be working in a module to advocate for growing plants from cuttings, because I think it's totally underrated. I think seed saving is becoming very mainstream now these days, and that's a good thing. People are aware of it, and people are looking to save their own seeds for a number of reasons, especially old varieties that you can't get anymore, or even locally adapted varieties as well. So it's definitely something that's going to be a lot more resilient to your local climate than some seeds that were produced elsewhere in the world. And of course, growing your own seeds, saving your own seeds, you can then share them with other people at seed swaps like we do, and you can even mix varieties too. You can grow your own varieties, and you don't have to spend as much money on seed as well. And you don't have to worry about seeds becoming scarce if you're saving your own and you're able to swap the surplus with fellow gardeners. That's why it's well worth coming to one of our seed swaps. We had 2 of those this year. We'll have another one sometime in autumn anyway. It'll be probably more of a harvest festival rather than a seed swap, but we will have seeds and cuttings at it too. There'll be semi-hardwood cuttings around that time of the year. Of course, there is, I did have a question actually during the week of when does softwood become semi-hardwood? So first, it would be worth explaining to you what is softwood. So that's just this year's growth on berry bushes or shrubs, for example. Any kind of bushy trees as well, like willows, for example. The green wood, this year's wood, is actually green wood up until midsummer. The 21st pretty much is solstice of June, and the green wood will turn hard after midsummer. The days get shorter, and the plant knows to turn it into wood, turn the new growth into wood, and it's actually going to make it a lot more brittle and a lot less flexible. And for after 6 weeks from midsummer, it's called semi-hardwood. So that's when it's hardwood, but the leaves are still on. And after the leaves are dropped in the winter, that's when it's called hardwood. So it's really just softwood, semi-hardwood, and hardwood. Those are the three types of wood that you can take cuttings from. And you can take cuttings any time of the year. And the only time I would not recommend taking cuttings, it's not really worthwhile. I'd say October, November, maybe even December, because the cutting won't have time. It might callus over those months, but it won't have time to grow. It won't grow until maybe February or March when it warms up a bit. And the trouble is, by then it might go rotten. So if you stick it into the ground directly or into seed starting soil, well, then you have a better chance. But if it's in a pot, you have to keep an eye on it for several months. So let me see here. Chris is saying, I got a very rare seed from a hybrid of Daubenton perennial crossed with Cavolo, Nero. Yeah, so that's the Nero, the Black Tuscany kale. Wow. I wonder what would happen if you cross Daubenton with Nero kale. All right, so the Daubenton did flower eventually after 6 years. Ours hasn't. We've had Daubenton for 3 years, I think, and we've had Taunton Dean kale for 4 or 5 years. We've also had, we used to have Portuguese kale for the last 10 years, and that was our favorite, but it's a short-lived perennial, so it only lasts for about 3 or 4 years. And in general, it does die back eventually, but we have some that's actually coming on to 5 years now, and it's going to seed. So it's actually in the new video that I put up earlier, the tour of the garden, the summer tour, or early summer tour. And about halfway through in the Woodchip Island, that's where the Portuguese kale is still going to seed every year for the last 4 years now. So this is its 5th year. But Portuguese kale it's very good. But there's other kales that are just as good, and they keep the greens. They're a bit hardier, and they also keep the quality of the greens higher. It's just better quality greens kept through the winter. So that's what you're looking for. Taunton Dean is probably the best one, and the Red Russian kale, of course. That'd be the two that I would go for winter kale, and that's when you need them the most, because you want to feed if you have chickens, you want to feed them greens in the winter. And you want to feed yourself greens too for soups. Yeah, so they are the same as tree collards. Yeah, tree collards are just perennial kales that keep growing year after year. The Portuguese kale is also known as walking stick kale, but for that to be practical, you have to make sure you grow it straight. And in Ireland, there's so much wind, so it keeps blowing the plant over, and then the plant grows up this way, and then you have a plant that's grown at a right angle, and then it falls over again in the year after that, and then it grows at a mad angle, as Mrs. Doyle would say. No, I have not been able to grow Portuguese kale or any kind of kale very tall. I prefer cutting it back so that it branches out and bushes out more. That way it's kind of getting rid of the weeds too. It keeps the weeds down all around it because it's bushier, but also it's just easier to take cuttings from it then. So I like to have lots of little cuttings rather than one giant cutting. Yeah, you can grow elderberry trees from softwood. So the only downside to softwood is that it dries out quicker. But the cambium layer, which is the green layer just under the outer bark, which is the main part of the tree that's alive, that's where it transports a lot of that's where all the action is from a biochemical point of view, I guess. It is much more pronounced in softwood. As the wood ages, even using 2 or 3 year old wood on berry bushes or elderberry trees or even willows, you have less chance of it rooting because there's just less activity, and the cambium layer is thinner as the wood gets older. But by all means, if you can, I would just cut the leaves back to a minimum if you are going to use softwood, because softwood is very easy to dry out. As long as you can get it to callus and root, that's the main thing. You don't need rooting hormone. I never use any. You can do another technique that Stefan uses from the permaculture orchard in Canada. He uses, so he just keeps a heel, where you just take the branch off the main branch of the main stem, you break it off rather than cutting it with a secateurs, and then you plant it as it is, and you might cut it shorter. And that keeping a heel will just have way more stem cells in the heel, and it'll actually root much faster, so you have a better chance of it surviving. So there's another question here. How are you doing, Elizabeth? Thanks for joining us. Would the seeds you collect yourself from your own plants last longer than other ones from the shop? So they'd be fresher. I don't think they'd last any longer unless you vacuum seal them. If you can keep the oxygen off them, I believe you could keep them for a very, very long time. I just heard today that some people actually were freeze drying the seeds as well in some of the seed banks, and can't really quite wrap my head around how that would help. But I guess those seed banks are trying to preserve them for a very long time. I think if you just keep them dry and dark and cool, they can last you a lot longer, and you won't know whether your seeds are still alive until you try and grow them, until you try to actually germinate them, because well, your viability goes down over the years. So some seeds are much more prone to, like, I heard carrot seeds are not very viable after several years, and some seeds would be fine for a few years. So I think there is all these survival seed vaults and all these things, like in a can, and I haven't got one. I never bought any of them because I think it's a waste of time. You should, although I'd rather have those seeds than have no seeds at all, but I think you're better off to, actually use your seeds every year and then grow them so that you learn how to grow your food and your plants in your garden, and then collect fresh seeds from those, or even keep some of them to go to seed again, and then collect the seeds and grow those again next year. That way your plants are actually adapting to your local climate as well, and you don't have to buy fresh seeds. But it's really important to store seeds not in a greenhouse. Sometimes I end up with seeds left in the greenhouse because I was meant to get those planted, but I haven't. The best method now that I have been able to come up with was to vacuum seal the seeds, then put them into an old metal biscuit tin, and then put the biscuit tin into a bag, and then keep them in the shed, and that keeps them rodent proof and critter proof. I see here, so Chris is saying pumpkins like Oshiki Kuri seeds last years. I germinated some 5 or 6 year old seeds you germinated, stored at room temperature. Okay, that's great. So I had 2 sets of pumpkin seeds last year, and almost none of them germinated, and those were my own saved seeds. And I think I simply washed them with too warm a water to clean them after removing them from the middle of a pumpkin. They were Oshiki Kuri as well, so the red curry, Japanese pumpkin. They are my favorite pumpkin at this point because they're smaller than a giant pumpkin. There's no point in growing giant pumpkins unless you're going to grow them just for decorations. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to eat them, even if they are decorations. But obviously, Oshiki Kuri has a really nice flavor, and you can still use them for Halloween if you want to put them on a windowsill, or on a wall even. You can actually just not carve them and eat them afterwards. So I know why people have the obsession with pumpkins and Halloween, but it used to be actually the parsnip. No, sorry, what was the name of it? they used to use a different vegetable for carving, actually. Traditionally, in Ireland, actually, is the turnip. That was it. So we also are growing Turk's turban now this year as a pumpkin variety, but Oshikikuri is the best one. So I could never figure out why those seeds didn't germinate, and I still have some other ones left. So I ended up buying seeds from a shop, and I had to get started again like that. But you know, those pumpkins, growing the smaller pumpkins especially, it's actually really nice because they make for like a couple of meals, and so you don't get sick of eating a giant pumpkin for a week, but also because they're small enough that you can actually give them to people and tell them, please save the seeds for yourself. And after you eat the pumpkin, you just have the seeds and then you can grow more. So it's like a neat little package. So you get food and you get seeds as well. And nature knows best how to package seeds. So Elizabeth also asked, how long would they last, and does it depend on the seed type? Definitely, some seeds, as I said, are prone to go off quicker, but I think tree seeds in general probably last the longest because they need a cold period, the stratification, basically just simulating a winter for them to germinate. There's actually enzymes on the outside of the seed, of the husk of the seed, and sorry, that's not right, on the seed itself, and those break down when it's cold, and then they basically germinate in the springtime. So there's no point in tree seeds germinating before the winter because the seedlings probably wouldn't make it. But I think tree seeds are probably the most storable. But it's good to know, Chris, that you can keep Oshikikuri seeds and still germinate them 5 or 6 years later successfully. So I'm definitely going to store, I'm going to do a lot of seed saving this year. In fact, we might actually put on a course just for seed saving. We have some seeds already developing now. The poppies are starting, and our great mullins, Olympic mullein as well. There's a number of options out there already. We have had the rhubarb go to seed as well. So I'm mixing actually a good stand of, like, say, 10 or 12 plants of Glaskin's Perpetual with 10 or 12 plants of Victoria rhubarb. I just grow them beside each other and let's see what comes of it. Of course, the Glaskin's Perpetual is ideal because you can harvest it until the end of the season, but we could test the stocks of our own variety afterwards to see if the oxalic acid levels are acceptable after midsummer. So folks, for those of you who just joined, if you'd like to ask questions, you can in the chat. If you come up with a question after that or after this show, you can always email us to contact@gardensforlife.ie, or just join us for our Thursday live questions and answers. Every Thursday, almost every Thursday. I will say always, sorry, not always, but almost always, because we have some other engagements now in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to be going to Longford to give a talk on gardening. Oh, let me see here. Our allium sale is still going on at the moment, so you can get 10% off on everything on our shop with garlic 24. That is the discount code. We have some different varieties of garlic now, and of course all garlic is perennial, but also perennial varieties of onions, like the potato onion, which we're not offering this year again. Not yet. We almost lost it last year, but now the Egyptian onions will also be available too. And of course, the bulbous leek called orphrey, which is a really nice vegetable. So Chris, you're saying make sure that you dry the pumpkin seeds enough so that they don't mold. Yeah, I had that problem before. No, I did dry them. I was wondering if I could dry them out too much. That wouldn't be a problem, I guess. My only guess is that I may have just maybe washed them too hot when I was cleaning them. That's my best guess now. Let me see here. With some cotton wool. So you can store them in a jar, dry them out properly, the seeds, store them in a jar with cotton wool, keep them in the fridge. Should last for up to 8 to 10 years that way. Oh yeah, so from a permaculture video. All right. Well, you know, it's actually good to get to freshen. You can always keep some old seeds, and we're all guilty, all gardeners are guilty of keeping some of your old seeds. Of course, we all have a big box full of seeds, and maybe even a second one. And a lot of those seeds, I'm always afraid of keeping them too long in case they're no longer viable at some point, or they become less and less viable. I try to actually use up the older seeds sometimes, just because I don't want to use up the new ones yet, just to get rid of the old ones and use them. But then we're just to find out whether those older seeds are still good. It takes a few weeks, and by then it might be too late in the growing season. So if I want to be sure I get some plants of that kind, or some vegetables of a particular type, if they need to be going in the ground at, say, this time of year, I might start some with new seeds and some with the older seeds, just to be safe. Again, these are things we can't predict, and all we can do is try to germinate some of those. Oh, let me see here. We've already been planting a lot of trees, actually, in between, and also a lot of shrubs in between our perennial beds. So there is a lot of herbaceous perennials in our gardens, especially in our no-dig gardens in the first year. There's some vegetables, annual vegetables in there, like beetroot and bits and pieces, like lettuce as well, a little bit. But mainly, I'm growing in the new no-dig gardens. Anytime I'm setting up a new one, in year one, it's going to be probably mostly annuals or plants that are perennial, but I'm going to dig them up at the end of the growing season to use them elsewhere, or to sell them, or to gift them to people or whatever. And I would, in the second year, I would add more perennials that are going to stay in situ thereafter. That means they're going to be growing there as long as they want to. They're not going to pull them up again. And eventually the garden turns into like a forest garden as we add our understory fruit tree layer. In Ireland, we don't bother with the 7th layer in the 7 layers of the forest. That's the canopy layer. So the tall trees would already take most of the available sunlight here. So we just erase that layer, and we start off with the fruit trees, top fruit, plums, apples, pears, whatever, maybe some cherries. The problem is with cherries, they burst when it rains too much, so it's not an ideal fruit to grow in Ireland. But apples work very well, and plums too, and all the mirabelles and all those. So then we have the fruit bushes like currants, gooseberries. There's a ton of different ones. So we have salmonberry, we have the Japanese wineberry is really nice too. The goji berry doesn't fruit here, not indoors or outdoors. I've had flowers all right, but they're a great hedging plant though. I might use the goji for that, because they're a little bit thorny and they grow really densely. So I wouldn't even be able to walk through where it grew. And so for livestock, it should work anyway, and to keep your property safe. Because you wouldn't believe the amount of damage a couple of sheep will do. They'll eat your whole garden in about 2 hours, maybe even shorter, maybe even quicker. So then we add our herbaceous perennials, which is like things like valerian, echinacea, some annuals as well, or biennials. So there will be a few vegetables in between, because why not? You can do kohlrabi or beetroots, or maybe even Swedes, apparently, Swedes store way longer than turnips. So that's just a little bit of a tip there. Jeez, when you keep talking, you go dry by. Oh, I have to keep drinking water. Gave up on strawberries. So Chris here is saying he gave up on strawberries and gojis. Birds were eating all the strawberries. Gojis didn't do anything for 5 years. Yeah, we have some goji bushes that are 5 years old and they didn't produce fruit. I think they just need an awful lot of heat. I think they need like 30 plus Celsius for like a prolonged period of time. And I think Ireland is too cold. They do grow in the desert, though. So they don't need a lot of water. For those of you living in a place that's arid, where there is not a lot of rain, goji might work. Goji is grand. Like, I mean, it's kind of an overrated superfood, I think. It's nice. I like it dried. Dried goji berries are nice to eat. They're kind of sweet. Fresh, they're meant to be not so nice. But I think you can do better in Ireland. I think you can do sea buckthorn. Sea buckthorn would be way better, I think, Chris, than goji. Strawberries, I've given up on strawberries a little bit. I grew 13 varieties of strawberries back 4 and 5 years ago. And in wood chips, they grow fine as long as you stay on top of them, but eventually they thin out and there's barely any left. They get smothered by a lot of other plants, especially creeping buttercups can end up in between them. And if you don't spot it straight away, you're going to end up with more creeping buttercups than strawberry plants. With strawberry plants, you need to, they're definitely a bit of maintenance. You can't really grow them on the ground, I don't think. It's too wet for that here in Ireland. I think you need to grow them in containers, like say 3 plants in a bucket, a 12-liter bucket, and just 3 plants on top. You have to use new plants every year, as far as my experience goes. You can also put them into crates as well, like the plastic supermarket crates. Fill it up with compost, regular old compost, like 6+ month old mushroom compost will do fine. You could add some mineral, like bit of seaweed dust and a bit of volcanic rock dust. Does very well. Any kind of container plants will definitely benefit from an added bonus there, because there is only so much compost in the container. Even if it's a crate, you can put 6 strawberry plants or even 8 strawberry plants into a crate like that. And if you have runners, you're going to get runners anyway once you grow strawberries for the first year. Just get the runners and put them into either pots, like 1-liter pots or whatever, and get them going. We actually grew 100 strawberry plants before in a house that we were renting. This was 9 years ago now. We had 100 strawberry plants, and each of them was in a 2-liter pot, just compost. We didn't even add any volcanic rock dust or anything. And we got about half a kilo of strawberries off each of those plants. So, in other words, 50 kilos of strawberries. And we had more than we could eat fresh. And we made jam, actually. We made strawberry jam. And rhubarb is the perfect vegetable to mix into jams and wines too, because it gives it the right consistency. It thickens it a bit. And it also adds a nice flavor as well, and it's usually available in an abundance. So if you ever are making jam or wine, you can use rhubarb to stretch your berries a little bit. Well, folks, we are now going for 44 minutes. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll finish it soon, because I'm probably going to start some more seeds this hour of the night. Could also do with editing a few short videos as well. And for those of you who haven't seen the new garden tour yet, I just uploaded it earlier. It's available on YouTube now. I'm not sure if it's on Odyssey yet. It's also linked on our website as well. It's just a tour of the garden, a half-an-hour video, real quick, walking around the garden. I'm sure I could really make those tours like 5 hours long if I talked about everything that has been going on. And it's actually good for me too to just take a step back sometimes and to just observe the garden, even if it's through the camera. But I definitely like giving courses and workshops and tours too, because then I get to just look around more rather than being focused on the daily task. Right now, it's really been a priority to try and keep all the nettles and grasses from going to seed, and basically planting up the new garden. So I think for those of you who have seen the pizza garden back 4 years ago now, that was a garden about 8 by 10 meters in size. So that was a no-dig garden, and it was for vegetables in the first year, and then it ended up being just berries now, and a lot of perennial vegetables as well. We probably have an area about twice that now in the new gardens that I made last month and this month. So just in the last 2 weeks, the new garden is done, and last month I planted up the other garden, and we are going to be giving you updates on that. So things have already doubled up, so it's good news. We have bronze fennel and all kinds of other bits and pieces, exotic kale varieties and mint varieties, all kinds of tuberous vegetables too, and some berry bushes in between. I can't help but plant some berry bushes at every corner in the garden. And then, of course, with a berry bush, you should probably throw in a few flowers as well. Even any kind of flowers really that flower for a very long period of time, like it would be called an insectary plant, that attracts beneficial insects to your garden. And hopefully you can make them stay, or give them some habitat to stay, and hopefully you can entice them to stay over winter, and then you've got them there next spring. The insect piles are the way to go. I think I'll be making a video about that shortly. Hopefully the weather will ease off again. Today was the first day of proper rain, and it flattened a lot of plants in the garden. I'm so glad I made that video a couple of days ago, because the lupin plant was our giant blue lupin plant in the garden. It's huge. It's about that size. It's literally 2 by 2 meters, and it got flattened by the rain today, unfortunately. But luckily, we've got it on video. So it'd be nice for myself even and the family to look at the videos and watch them again. Even the videos from a few years ago. Looking back, they're still good, and it's good to see progress. And I think I have a fair idea on what I'm going to write my book about. I was going to write it on homesteading, but I think I'm going to go with how to move, basically the way I'm moving no-dig gardens and transitioning them into forest gardens, pretty much in a 3 or 4 year kind of a cycle. And once you have a forest garden, it basically just becomes productive but extremely low maintenance. And of course, the owl layer wood chips is gonna be the number one thing you can do to make it lower maintenance, so that you can concentrate your time on expanding your garden elsewhere. So that's what I've been doing for many years now, and that's the only way I'm able to even manage about a couple of acres of gardens on my own, pretty much. I'm able to turn other areas that I previously used for annual vegetable production, for example, in the first year, from years ago, I'm turning those into lower maintenance, so that I don't have to look after them as much. And basically just interplanting perennials. Perennials are just plants that grow for 3 years or more, for those of you who don't know. All right, folks. Well, thank you for listening in, and thanks for joining and asking questions. We will be here again next week, and in 2 weeks' time, we're going to take a break, because we're going to have a talk on the Thursday evening at a garden club. So if you guys have any questions in the meantime, you can always go to our website, or you can send us an email. Let me see here. We also have events coming up. If for those of you who are not too far from here, we have workshops and lots of different types of workshops on gardening, homesteading, keeping chickens. Today was pressure canning, actually. That was booked out, so we must host another. And if you'd like to support us, you can join our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/birdlandhomestead. And you can also support us by just getting some plants or just give us a thumbs up. We'd highly appreciate that. Thank you, guys. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.